For centuries, Africans were taken from Africa, had their spirits broken, and turned into slaves by Europeans. However, according to how the subject is taught in schools, Europeans did little other than travel to Africa and purchase already enslaved peoples. Almost as though they simply passed by the local supermarket, picked up a few slaves, and went home. This places the blame and the guilt of slavery firmly on Africans. It's hardly surprising, then, that I regularly get told stories of black schoolchildren suffering deep distress and guilt, having endured lessons on slavery. In addition, this misinformation causes division in the wider African community, with diasporan Africans blaming continental Africans for the enslavement of their ancestors. This is the world according to the Europeans. Where they commit the most heinous acts, yet are presented as innocents. Yeah, slavery did exist in Africa, but there are many forms of slavery. The slavery that existed across much of Africa isn't dissimilar to the slavery that exists in European societies today. In Africa, people captured in wars or found guilty of a crime were subjected to forced labour. Some captives were sold to private buyers, and some were mistreated. However, they all had rights, and after serving their time, many rejoined society. In European societies today, we don't call it slavery, we call it the penal system. People captured in wars or found guilty of a crime are subjected to forced labour. Some are sold to private buyers. There are many private prisons across the world who make money from their captives. Again, many captives are treated badly, but they do have rights. The slavery we suffered at the hands of Europeans was chattel slavery. We weren't seen as human beings, merely chattel, property, the owner of which could do with as they wished. And this was exacerbated by Europeans educating the world to believe that Africans were less than human. Scientific apologists such as Voltaire and David Hume taught that Africans and Europeans had separate origins, i.e., were not even of the same species. When Africans sold their captives to Europeans, and it has to be noted here that many African nations did so under force of arms, something not always mentioned in the school curriculum. When they did, there was no reason to believe that their treatment would be any different from the slaves held by Africans. There are many examples of African nations having discovered the truth, rebelling and refusing to trade with Europeans. The story is equally twisted when it comes to the role of the abolitionists. If your knowledge of the abolition of the slave trade comes only from mainstream European sources, then you probably would not know of the Africans, both across the diaspora and on the continent, who fought against slavery. Africans who escaped slavery in the plantations formed societies, which then fought against the Europeans and their military forces. They disrupted the trade of the plantations, destroying their crops, or even burning the entire plantation down. They were commonly labelled Maroons, a name said to have different language sources, the most popular being the word cimarron, which is a term for domesticated animals that escape to the wild. The Maroons included different groups such as the Garifuna, the Alcan, the Quilombola, etc. All fought for freedom. European commentary was so twisted that they even presented the escape from slavery as a sign of illness. Africans were said to be suffering from drapetomania, or flight from homesickness. It was believed that the desire to leave the warmth and safety of the plantation and live wild as Africans was a form of sickness. African activities against slavery in the plantations and the mines, etc., contributed greatly to the eventual abolition of the trade. But little of this is mentioned in the European histories. Instead, we hear of great Europeans who fought to protect the poor Africans. The only Africans included in these stories are those who were recognised or lived as Europeans, such as Equiano, aka Gustavus Vassa, Frederick Douglass, Mary Prince, Sojourner Truth. Another twist in the story, and one that's not taught, is what abolitionists did after slavery. Abolitionists may have fought against slavery, but were not free from racism. They may have objected to the inhuman treatment of Africans, but didn't see Africans as equal. A number of abolitionists became involved with the rape of Africa. They encouraged the colonization of Africa to both replace the bounty lost through the abolition of the slave trade and to civilize those African savages. John Gurney, a Quaker industrialist and anti-slavery leader, said, "Britain had two overlapping objectives of developing the resources of the soil of Africa and of raising the native mind." It could be argued that this was a continuation of slavery. Instead of transporting slaves from Africa, Europeans effectively turned the African continent into one large plantation. After carving up the continent between them, European nations then transformed their African territories into single crop facilities, producing raw materials for European commerce. According to Patrick Scanlan, from the Centre for Diaspora and Transitional Studies at the University of Toronto, in partnership with the Manchester cotton merchant Thomas Clegg, the Christian Mission Society sent missionaries of both European and African origin to the African continent, with cotton seeds and equipment for its production, effectively re-establishing cotton plantations. Anti-slavery did not equal anti-exploitation of Africans. Indeed, Scanlan goes on to say that anti-slavery was a natural partner for a global order, a European global order, that is. It promised low-cost and highly productive labour from colonial subjects. It was believed that low wages encouraged prudence and sobriety. To be exploited was to be educated.